Hi, everyone. Welcome to our presentation, answering the biggest questions about your fleet's engine oil. I'm Jason Morgan, the content director of Fleet Equipment and a moderator in today's event. This webinar is sponsored by DA Lubricant Company. So optimizing your fleet's oil lineup can yield significant cost and time savings, as well as increase the lifespan of your equipment. During this webinar, we're going to talk about how to find the right oil specification for your application. And when we say that we're answering the biggest questions for your fleet, we really mean it. We have a live Q&A. I've got a few questions for our presenter here, but we have a live Q&A at the end of this. We want to answer your questions. We want to know what's on your mind. So please send us your questions as you think about them during this event. We'll try to address as many questions as we can in the back half of the webinar. To submit the question, type your question into the Ask a Question box and then click Submit. Again, please send them as you think about them. We'll compile them all. We'll go through them here at the end, but you don't want to forget your question, right? So send it to us when you think about it, and then we will get to it on the back half of this webinar. Please send us questions. We're really excited to answer them. A few more housekeeping items for you before we get rolling here. We're going to be recording this webinar. It is recording right now. It'll be available on demand for you to view after it. So you can share it, send it, come back and reference it. You'll receive an email with a link to the on-demand version in a few days. And we'll also have it on the Fleet Equipment website where you can check it out. Within the webinar platform there, you have the ability to open and close and resize different elements and windows on your screen. You can download a certificate there to share or to say that you attended the webinar. You can share the webinar with all those icons on there. They're in the black toolbar on the left side of your screen. On a mobile device, if you're on a phone, you might need to use that little menu icon to open that up. Really, we have feedback, right? We want to hear from you. We're going to have a survey pop up here at the end of our quick presentation, our quick questions. Let us know how we did. Let us know what you thought. It only helps us get better. So it'll pop up at the end of the presentation. Go ahead and fill that out, send it over. If you need help at any point during the webinar, click the help icon for any troubleshooting tips. And of course, the great IT advice. If anything goes wrong, you can refresh your window and hopefully that will take care of your problem. Now I'd like to introduce my co-presenter. We are happy to have Jim Salmon joining us today. He is the technical manager for DA Lubricants Company. He provides sales, staff, and customer support, lubrication recommendations, product education, parts analysis, troubleshooting, product cross-referencing. We've talked with him a lot before too. I mean, he is a go-to guy when it comes to oil spec. He is certified in truck engine analysis and is also a certified Caterpillar engine instructor. Jim, welcome. Thank you for taking the time. This is great.
Thanks for having us on. Good to see you again.
All right, so we're going to jump right into the questions here because engine oil is definitely something that's super important and becoming more complicated as truck equipment evolves and gets even better. So right now, let's just kick it off right here of choosing my product, right? The basics. How do I choose the right product for my application?
Great question, and that's one that I get asked all the time. You can refer to any of our salespeople out there, and they'll tell you that sometimes I ask a lot of questions when it comes to what oil goes in what application.
Right.
Just as an example, a lot of people will ask me, say, hey, I use XYZ product. What do you have that's comparable to that? Well, I can do that all day long. No problem. I can tell you what our product is, what makes it a little bit better, what makes it a little bit more unique, things like that. But what's more important is, what is it going in? What are you putting that lubricant in? Because by just crossing that product and saying, this is what we have that's similar to that or in the same category as that, we may be missing the boat, because how do we know that customer was using the right product to start with? So that's probably the biggest question up front that we're going to ask is, what are you using it in? Next is probably your service manual. Do you have a service manual with the piece of equipment or the vehicle that you're using or that you purchased? What do they call for? What is the OEM asking, and what is their requirement? lot of people will say, well, the OEM wants this and that, but I want to use this. Okay, well, maybe we can do that. But one of the things to keep in mind is the OEMs aren't just making stuff up. But they've done a lot of testing and they're responsible for that equipment. So what they're recommending is going to be probably what you should be using or something very, very similar to that. One of the first questions I'll ask after that is this thing under warranty? Is it under warranty? Then the question is, what does the OEM want, and what do you have that meets those specifications? So that's where I'm going to go with that next. And then if you have another question on that, then check with your lubricant provider. If it's not DA, it should be. But if it's not DA, check with your lubricant provider and tell them what your vehicle is. If you know the specs, that'll just save them some time. If you don't, then they should be able to look that up and say, hey, this piece of equipment calls for this. And a lot of the OEMs will give you a couple of different options based on that application. In other words, a bulldozer. Yeah, a bulldozer, it may say, depending on the ambient temperature range, you may want to go with the 1030 or a 1540. For your transmission, a 10 weight or a 30 weight. Some people up in northern Alaska may need a different viscosity for that application than somebody down in Miami, Florida. So those are some of the questions we'll ask as to how do I know what's right for my application.
Right. Well, in the heavy duty truck world too, as we've seen engines evolve, and as you point, engine manufacturers are very specific as to which oil you should use in new engines. I know the tendency to go to the tried and true 15W40, but hey, like you mentioned, 10W30, it's a real spec that a lot of them are recommending right now. You can drive it even further. You got CK4 oils, you got FA4 oils, you got all sorts of oils, right? And so as a fleet manager and someone that's dealing with this, one of the other big questions we ask is, how can I consolidate my lubricants? Do you have any advice for, hey, I've got a mixed fleet of some older engines, some newer engines. I got a lot of different oil specs coming at me now, even within my own application. How can I consolidate this?
Right. And that is something that we do on a daily basis is try to, the customer only has 5 bulk tanks on their property and they've got 4,000 pieces of equipment or something like that. And we have to figure out what we can do. And a lot of times you can use consolidate products. We're going to talk later on a little bit about one of our products that's designed for different types of engines applications. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But what we're going to do is what I'm going to do as a technical manager is I'm going to look at your fleet and look at what you want to use or what your representative has suggested you use and decide whether or not that fits. And the way I do that is I'm going to look at the application. I'm going to look at the piece of equipment itself. What does the OEM require? And again, that question goes back, is it under warranty? If it's under warranty, then we may be limited to what we can do on that just because you don't want to. In other words, the product may work fantastic, but if it doesn't quite have that stamp of approval from the OEM, even though the company stands behind it, you don't want to risk that. So that's always going to be in the forefront is it under warranty? If it is, what does the OEM want? That's what we're going to go with. But we'll look at application, we'll look at specifications, and then we'll look at the different oils that are out there and decide whether or not those meet the needs of that piece of equipment. And it may be exactly what this one needs, and it may be acceptable for this other one. So those are the things we'll consider. And we do what we call lube surveys or lube recs, if you will, recommendations, where the customers send in a whole list of their fleet, what they're equipped. Where we've got an engine, we've got a transmission, we've got 2 final drives on this piece of equipment. What do you recommend goes in there? And along with that comes a recommendation from their salesperson in cooperation with the owner as to what products they would like to use. And I'll go down through there and use that as much as I possibly can. But there may be some stipulations on that says this is outside the realm of what the OEM wants. As long as you're understanding that and your drain intervals are adjusted accordingly, then yes, you can do that. So consolidation is definitely something that we're going to do. That is going to be used and that we will look at. Some of the other things on there we have to look at is like drain interval. I want to go X amount of miles or X amount of hours on my piece of equipment, and I want to use this product. Well, first of all, products don't last forever. For good thing for us because we wouldn't sell that much. But so we have to look at the drain interval based on that. How do they want to do it? If they want to extend that drain interval, if they want to go 500 hours on that piece of equipment, can they compromise or consolidate and use this other product? Sometimes it's, yeah, no problem. It's way above and beyond that. But sometimes we just can't do that based on what they want to do. And we can either say, yes, we can consolidate, but you're going to have to adjust your drain interval accordingly on set amount of equipment to meet those needs. I mentioned ambient temperature, operating temperature range, where you're at, where you're going to be using that piece of equipment, and whether or not the OEM will allow that viscosity or that type of additive package in that environment. So consult with your lubricant provider, give them the following information: make, model, year of the unit, any service related information, like I said, your drain interval, what the application, what are you doing with that? I mean, we've got people that will have a rock truck and they're moving stone. Well, in order to make the most money, you're going to and save the most time, you're going to load that truck all the way up as far as you can. Well, a lot of times when the OEM set these standards for drain intervals, they're taking into consideration normal operating, and they'll even say that in there, extreme or normal operating. So you may or may not be able to use that depending on the application or what they're doing with that truck. So drain interval applications, etc. And do you do oil sampling? If you have oil sampling, then we can look at that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Oil sampling program to see how those units are holding up with that under that application with the recommended product. So those are just some things that are going to be considered when you're trying to consolidate. But the answer is yes. A lot of them can be consolidated.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting that in working with fleets, you're asking for what oils they're already carrying. As you mentioned, you have the bulk tanks; you only have a few of them. Adding that into your recommendations is really interesting because there's a huge balance right now, and especially as engine technology continues to be pushed forward. They're striving for greater efficiency, reduced emissions. Engine oil is changing a lot too, and we're kind of at the point now where a lot of those engines from maybe 3 or 4 years ago have really saturated the market, where you got into some of the first lower viscosity oils, some of the 10W recommendations, some of the FA4 oils. You're seeing those. Maybe those are going in the secondary lives. You got new engines coming in. And I get how people might want to just kind of go back to the tried and true thing. But to your point, warranty is hugely important. You don't want to do anything just for convenience sake that might void or conflict with a warranty because you're trying to protect yourself there. And then just run as efficiently as possible. And one of those words that comes up when you're looking at your fleet and you're looking at your engines and you're looking at the recommended oils is backwards compatible. Say backwards compatible. What does that mean? What are they talking about, backwards compatibility?
Well, backwards compatibility is simply the API sets the standards. They'll say for today's, and that's in working in conjunction with the OEMs as well to figure out what these engines need and what's required for them. So basically what they do is they just improve the formula. They'll use better additive package, different base oils, different combinations to get a real robust package. So, but as the EPA gets involved, as the OEMs make changes, fuel economy, my gosh, that's the biggest thing now, not just for over the road trucks, but for heavy equipment, where that's the biggest expense to any fleet owner is fuel, especially with today's prices. It's just crazy. So what can we get out of there? So they're also looking at that, but they're also looking at longevity. You can't compromise with a lighter viscosity oil without increasing the quality of the additive package just to gain fuel economy, or a gallon here, a gallon there. It's just not going to do it. So luckily, up until this last change, every time the API has established a new category, they've always been backwards compatible. In other words, if I had a 2004 piece of equipment or a car or a truck, and the new category comes out. Then I've got a 2017. I've got to buy this new category oil for that 2017, but maybe my 2004 didn't need that. Well, luckily, like I said, up until now, and I'll explain that, up until now, it's okay. You don't have to buy two oils. Buy the newer oil for your newer vehicle, and it will work or be backwards compatible to your older piece of equipment or your older vehicle. Now, with that being said, there is, as of the last change, when we went to CK4, a split category. And that split category was called FA4. So F, I'm assuming, stands for fuel economy, and A just means it's the first one in the alphabet, the first category, first time for that category. So what we're seeing with that is we're seeing a much more robust additive package, but we're also seeing lighter viscosities. So your typical, like you said a while ago, the go-to 15W40 is now being replaced with the 10W30, and in some areas, and coming to your theater near you soon, is your 5W30s for your heavy-duty diesel off-road and on-road vehicles.
Right.
And one of the questions I saw pop up briefly on there, I can just kind of touch on it, was why hasn't FA4 caught on? Well, I don't haven't done a study on that, but my opinion is people are scared of it. The OEMs haven't embraced it. It's coming around, but the industry hasn't embraced it yet. The lubricant manufacturers haven't started putting it out there because why would you if no one's going to buy it? We're not going to put it on the shelves. It's lighter viscosity scare people. One of the things they don't realize is the additive packages are becoming more and more robust to take up for that viscosity loss, or I won't say loss, viscosity change. So what we always thought of before, heavier is better, heavier is better. Well, that heavier oil doesn't flow as well. It can't get to some of the areas as quickly as it needs to offer the protection that it needs. And that's another reason you're seeing more synthetics and synthetic blends, because of their ability to flow better and get to where they need to be quicker. But the OEM tolerances in their bearings, in their orifices, the things are a lot smaller and tighter. So they have to have that lighter oil to flow through there. So in order to do that, again, more robust additive packages. So that's where we're seeing that. And with the CK4 being backwards compatible, so don't worry about if your piece of equipment calls for a CK4 and you have a CI4, you can use the CK4. It is backwards compatible. It's available in 1030, 1540. Some other people, we have a 540 CK4, and there are other viscosities out there. One of the things to ask is, does my OEM allow an FA4 formulation? And if they do, it's available. What viscosity do they have? And is it backwards compatible? It may not be. That's the first time we've had that come into play, where just because you got a new formula, you can use it in your old stuff. There's got a lot of questions have to be asked when you have an FA4 formula, whether or not the OEM will allow that to be used.
Right. And real quick there, if I may, because we have also asked the question numerous times here at Fleet Equipment, why hasn't FA4 caught on? And some fun, again, now this is my own opinion, so take it for what it's worth. But I mean, that was at a time, and you all would know at DA Lube, but engine emission regulations were being put in place. Engine manufacturers were really looking at all avenues for how they were going to hit those emissions and fuel efficiency standards. Oil, especially when it was still back in the PC11 phase, was a big part of that. And so I feel like there was this movement at the time that, hey, we're going to have these new engines, we're going to have a new oil, it's going to be more fuel efficient, we're going to hit the emissions regulations together, and it'll be great. And then what ended up happening was the engine manufacturers just hit them anyway and said, oh yeah, still go use the oil you were using. Oil manufacturers put all the time to develop FA4, and to your point, they are available. It varies from manufacturer to manufacturer on the engine side. Some do recommend or approve the use of FA4, but yeah, to your point, 4, 5, maybe even 6 years ago now, there are only a handful that were really recommending or supporting FA4 in the engine. But to your point now, that's as emissions regulations get tighter and tighter, that's something that I imagine that you're right. We're going to be seeing more and more as the standard, even factory fill here in the coming years for new engines of an FA4 oil, just because the emissions regulations and fuel efficiency standards are just getting so high to some degree.
That's absolutely correct. And in the other thing that to mention was with and it is available. The FA4 fluids are out there and can be purchased, but the manufacturers, the OEMs weren't over emphasizing it. The oil industry again didn't go jump in there and start making all these different viscosities in this FA4. It's like, why build it? We're not sure they're going to come, kind of thing,
Right.
So
yeah, and change is hard. People don't like to change.
Right. With CK4, I mean, it got hit hard. Emissions got hit really hard, and everyone looked at that and said, and they're still saying it. What else can they address? I mean, the fuel sulfur is down to 15 parts per million. I mean, that's nothing when you're looking at ppms, and you're looking at the standards for your after treatment systems. So really, the only thing left, I mean, I'm sure they'll find a way to tweak that some more, but the only thing really left is fuel economy. And the biggest thing to do on that is viscosity, because viscosity is resistance to flow. Lower viscosities, less resistance, more fuel economy. So you're seeing that across the board, not just in engine oils, but you're also seeing it in all the way down to greases, grease on your axles, things like that. And I have seen back when CK4 first came out, I saw an ad in a magazine. I won't mention the company's name, but it was a big name oil company that was saying guaranteed X amount of mile increase by using this full synthetic engine oil. Well, in the fine print, it says tested with synthetic gear oil, synthetic differential lubricant, synthetic, full synthetic this and that, even had full synthetic grease. So in order to get this, they spent a lot of money on a product. So is it worth it? Do I need to gain that 1 mile to gallon? Is it worth spending the money for full synthetic this, and this? So I think things kind of slowed down a little bit right there, where fuel economy is just now being addressed as the only thing left to go after.
Right. Especially at that lubricant level, which kind of brings me to my next question, right? If I have a mixed fleet, I got different nameplates, I got different engines, I got different model years. Are there product categories that can help me out there? Can I use these for mixed fleets, or how many oils do I have to have if I'm doing that?
Sure. Well, I can speak for DA. I'll speak directly for DA, but I can also say that 99.9% of all the OEMs out there have a similar type of product. This goes back to the consolidation. When you've got a mixed fleet, there's a lot of school bus companies out there, municipalities, that will have their diesel engines. And instead of just swapping everything out and spending all that money up front, get rid of the diesel and put in their LP or their natural gas engines, or even their gasoline, either phasing it in or phasing it out. They're not going to do it all at once. So now they're going to have a mixed fleet. You're going to have X amount of trucks that are diesel, X amount that are LP, and maybe even some gasoline. So the oil manufacturers have come up with different products. Ours is known as Reliant X92, and I'll explain that name here in a second. But the nice thing about that is it does carry the CK4, which is the backwards compatible current API standard for heavy duty and even light medium duty diesel engines, available in 1030 and 1540. The nice thing about that is it also carries an SN rating. The SN is for your service category or your spark ignited for your gasoline type engines. But one of the things that makes it most popular is the fact that it's also compatible with your LP or natural gas engines, which are becoming very much more popular, especially in municipalities and things like that. So the X92 came from the latest Cummins specification for their gasoline engines. Cummins is one of the biggest players in the natural gas engine line right now, heavy duty gas engine line. So that their latest specs ends in a 9.2. So we just incorporate that into the name of our product, so it can be separate from the other ones and be familiar. So that market is growing quite a bit because of the fact that people are looking at alternative fuel sources, and LP and natural gas is up and coming.
And that's a great point too, because you mentioned Cummins. You look at some of the work they're doing. They're going to a fuel agnostic platform where a good chunk of their engine is going to be just kind of the base engine, and then they're going to be able to support natural gas, gasoline, hydrogen, even, right? They're going to be hydrogen ICE engines, and lubrication is going to be a big part of that, and it does require that specific spec and those attributes. So that's a great point there, and kind of interesting to see how we'll, this decarbonization, as they call it, where it's fuel efficiency. Yes, you're being more fuel efficient, but you're reducing emissions, and it'll be really interesting to see how that evolves, because I think you're right. I think natural gas, even maybe hydrogen, will be big players in the internal combustion engine arena here, even in the next 5, 10, 15 years on the heavy duty market side for sure.
Well, and one of the things, as we all know from CK4 when it first came out, or I'm sorry, CJ4 when CJ4 first came out, the reason for that was the after treatment systems on the diesel engines. So you got to keep that in mind when you're developing a across the fleet or a mixed fleet type product. There are different types of catalysts that you're dealing with. With the diesel engine, you're dealing with the diesel oxidation catalyst as well as a DPF. Where on your gasoline, you'll have your regular catalytic converters. So they use, while they're similar, there are some differences in those, and you got to make sure that there's no chemical reaction or adverse effect on those expensive after treatment parts.
Right, for sure. Okay, I want to remind everyone we are going to be getting your questions. I have one question left, and actually, we've had a good number of questions come in already. I might steal a little bit from one of the ones that was asked, but please send us your questions. We're going to jump into that in a minute. So my final question, Jim, optimal drain intervals. What is the optimal drain interval? How do you find it? We'll start with that, and I got a follow up there for you.
Okay. Well, it kind of goes back to what I've said before. The very first question that I'm going to ask is your piece of equipment or your car under a warranty? If it is, then I will say, go to your book, see what it is, or I can look it up for you, or your lubricant manufacturer should be able to look it up for you. And they'll probably give you, depending on what the application is, a couple different options for the severity of the work that you're doing or the build on that particular piece of equipment. It may require something a little bit different. But OEMs test their limits. They know what these pieces of equipment can do. They're going to look at the viscosities. They're going to look at the drain interval options and see what best fits the needs for that piece of equipment. I mean, they built it, so they're the ones who need to be standing behind it. So obviously not going to push it above and beyond. As an oil manufacturer, we've got to consider worst case scenario on these, because I don't know about you, but I work for an oil company, but I'm probably the worst one there is as far as taking care of my own vehicle. I work on everybody else's stuff, but mine tends to sit there a little bit longer. But anyway, that's don't do as I do as I recommend. So that kind of thing there. But they'll go through and they'll do their testing, and they'll pick a conservative number based on the diversity of the equipment that's in their lineup, and they'll try to decide what's good for that warranty purposes. But again, we have to build it so that we'll meet those needs, and we probably have to keep in mind that accidents happen. People miss a drain interval. Are they going to be able to sleep well knowing they went 1,000 miles over or went 100 hours over what they can do? And I'm going to come back with comprehensive used oil analysis. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough as far as the only way to really understand what's going on in there. But I get calls all the time. One of the hardest things I have to deal with is with and some of the other guys that are out there on the DA team understand this, our Ping Grade 1. Our Ping Grade 1 is our high performance line of products. And that's not an API licensed product. It carries no OEM, whatever. It's strictly for legacy pieces of equipment as well as racing, things like that. So it's its own category. But I get asked all the time, well, how many races can I go on that oil before I drain it? Well, that question, if you can answer that question and sleep well at night by giving those people an actual number, then you're a much better man than I am, because it's going to vary from race to race, from piece of equipment to piece of equipment. So I can't give you that. I can give you a conservative guess as to what you're using, what the industry's doing, what other drivers and racers are doing. So that one there is the worst. The other one is just on, I want to, from this oil to your oil, how many miles more can I go on that? Again, is it under warranty? Go with what the OEM says. And if you're not using a oil analysis program, you really can't. I can't do it. I just can't do it. I won't do it. I will tell you, they said, well, the OEM said 5,000 miles. Okay, our oil will go 5,000 miles. The other guy said, well, this one here says if I use this, I can go 10,000. Well, you're doing it? Yep, ours will do it. It's not a problem. We will meet whatever the OEM requirements are. But if you're trying to push this above and beyond the limit of what that OEM does, well, maybe it can be done. But you're going to have some help with that, and that's a comprehensive oil analysis program. What I'm talking about is you take you take a little bottle of oil drained out after during your oil change or before your oil change, and you send that in to a laboratory. We offer that program here, but so do other companies. Send that in, and that'll give you a good look at what's going on with the wear metals to see whether or not it's a good idea to extend that. Maybe everything looks fantastic, and maybe we can go another 1,000 miles on your automobile, go another 100 hours on your piece of equipment. Then let's look at it again and see if we can go even farther. Now, a lot of times our salespeople don't like that because, if we're extending their drains out, they're not selling as much oil. But, you got a quality product. You want to make sure that the customers are getting the use out of that product, and don't throw bad oil away. People just can't afford, although oil is a cheap insurance policy. I can't emphasize that enough. It's much cheaper than an engine or a transmission or a gearbox. There is still a cost associated with that. So you want to get as much as you can out of it without jeopardizing the longevity or the durability of your piece of equipment. One of the things that as an OEM or as a oil manufacturer that we look at is, with used oil analysis, we're looking at how it's holding. Customers are looking at how it's wearing, how their engine or how their components are holding up into that. We're looking at how is our oil holding up under those conditions that they're operating it in. So it helps us decide whether or not we want to make this product a little bit more robust. It's overkill for the application that's in there. Maybe we can save the customer some money by recommending a not less durable. That's a bad way to say it. But a less expensive product that will meet the needs of that without breaking the bank. So an oil analysis program is going to give you all of that. It's going to give you the look at your equipment, how it's holding up, how you're operating it. And then also from our end, is the product we recommended working for them in that. And we can look at those and get all that from there.
Right. Well, and we have a lot to unpack there. We got a couple questions, at least related to that. And going back to real quick, I mean, you even think about the environment you're operating in and how drastically what you thought you were operating in is changing, right? We've seen heat waves, we've seen air quality alerts across the country. That's going to impact how the engines are operating, right? So having that used oil analysis is definitely important. One quick follow-up, I've got a bit of housekeeping, but I do want to hit this since we're talking about it. We had a question come in. Again, keep sending them. We'll keep answering them. That stated that their manufacturer recommends a 250-hour drain interval. And they ask, is there a time limit I should be concerned about? Is that where they should aim? Is there anything before, anything after? What do you think?
Yeah, you see that more in the automotive and the trucking type industry where they give you a mileage, but they all are an hour rate. They also give you like a miles or hours, but you don't really see that too much in the construction equipment because they almost always go by hours. So
Yeah.
they look, like your car, you get up, start it, you may drive to the store and back, or you may drive to California and back. Those are completely different types of driving. With heavy equipment, you're doing the same thing with that piece of equipment day in and out for the most part. So they're going to look at that drain interval and they're going to set that hour rate. There's usually not a time frame. A lot of people will incorporate a time frame into their maintenance schedule, but that's strictly on a individual basis or a company-wide policy. You probably won't see that from the OEM. I know with like after treatment systems that they come out with it and they said you got to go 1,500 hours or 130,000 miles to the trucking industry because there's a lot of idle time on that. There's over the road trucks, and then there's idle, then there's vocational trucks, so they're going to be different. So, but with pieces of equipment, heavy equipment, I would say stick with what the 250 hour under warranty. After warranty, if you've got a oil sample program going, you can look at possibly extending that. But I wouldn't think of giving a time frame on that as well for that application. Now, granted, if they run it in like the Midwest area where a lot of the construction is seasonal, they may want to just go ahead and set a time frame on that themselves because it did set all winter. Now there could be moisture, there could be condensation. You may want to just wait till or have a first drain be a little bit shorter. Next one might be a little bit longer because you're operating it. It's up to the company. But I would stick with what the OEM says as far as drain interval or based on what your lube provider or your sample provider, used oil sample provider results come out to.
Right. I want to dive into that used oil analysis real quick before I forget, before we get to going too much here. I do want to ask everybody, you're going to see a survey pop up. Please, we want your feedback. We want to know what you think. We have an incentive here, a fun incentive to complete the survey. We're offering $10 Amazon gift cards, $10 Amazon gift cards to 25 randomly selected people who complete today's survey. So good opportunity there to earn a few bucks for helping us out and filling out the survey. It should appear in the middle of your screen here in a moment. If you don't see it, you can launch it by going to the black toolbar on the left of your screen and clicking the survey icon. Okay, and keep sending questions too, because we're still answering. We still got a number here. Going back to the used oil analysis, you gave us great examples of why we should use it. You mentioned that when you're looking for it, you're looking at the quality of your oil and how it's behaving and if it's degrading over time the way you expect. We have a question come in of what would indicate a good oil analysis and what would be a bad oil analysis? Is there a difference or any standout features of this is a good report and this is a bad oil analysis report card?
Yeah, well, the lab takes some of that some of the question on that out of play by tagging them as green, yellow, red to give you an idea of whether it's good, whether it's okay, or whether you need to look at something. And most of the time, a good lab will give you comments on there as to what possible causes for that used on there. But for me or for other people that look at these samples, we kind of get excited because we're oil geeks when it comes to this stuff. We look at this and I kind of like to play CSI. I think I'm investigating all this stuff. I got the evidence in front of me, but it does work like that. I mean, a doctor looks at your chart, looks at your blood work and comes up with some stuff. Your oil is the lifeblood of your engine. And by looking at this, you can kind of make some determinations. But when I look at an used oil analysis to find out whether it's good or bad, I don't really care what the colors are. I look at the entire program that's reported on there. Some people say, I look down here at the TBM, which is your total base number, your acid reducing ability of your oil. That's really low. We got to condemn that oil. Well, maybe not. And I say that because my wear metals are down. My oxidation rate is in acceptable ranges. I'm not quite to 500 hours or 10,000 miles. I look at, there's no contaminants. I don't see any signs of coolant in there. I don't see any silver or any copper. My levels look like they're holding up really well for that. So you got to look at the whole picture to see whether it's a good report or a bad report. One item like TBN could get flagged at a certain percentage of use and say, well, it's below its standard, what it should be for those hours. But if you're using a quality base or a very, very quality or base oil and a very high TBN rate with good TBN retention, and your oxidation rate's low and your wear metals are low, that could be a good report, even though the one little thing got flagged as red or as yellow. May not necessarily mean it's a bad report. It just means let's take a look at this, keep an eye on it. And a lot of times they'll call me and they'll ask me questions on it. I said, okay, you're fine. Don't worry about that. We expect a little bit of viscosity. We expect a little bit of shearing to go on with our polymers. It's not a perfect world. No matter how good of a shear stable polymer you buy, it's going to shear over time. But is it staying? Is it not? Is it shearing like we expect it to, and not over shearing? And that's going to be based on application. So you just have to look at the entire report. I can't give you a yeah. As long as you see this, this, and this, it's good. I can't do it. It's going to be different. And I've done this before on some of the other ones. You could have two pieces of equipment that are identical, two different operators. Oh, they could be twin brothers, and they operate the equipment the same way. I mean, they're twin sisters. They operate it the exact same way and this doing the same thing, digging the same amount of dirt every day. Cycle time's the same. But when you look at the sample reports, they could be night and day difference. Not everything wears the same. So what's good on one may not be good on the other. So you just have to look at them on an individual basis. I know I walked and waffled all over that answer, but that's just the way it is in this industry.
No, no. I mean, it's well taken. I liked your CSI analogy there. That's the next webinar we'll do. We'll get you some sunglasses, and you'll have some like witty things to say as you look at a
Sure.
report about how it's a slippery slope or something. It'll be fantastic. Yeah. Oh, there you go. That'll be awesome. We'll go through some of those. Oil analysis, you definitely want to catch those operating conditions if there's a change, or if you do need to look at something that's kind of your, like you put it, your doctor's checkup report. We had a question come in though of what your experience is of any real world equipment failures using the wrong engine oil. What's really at stake here if you don't take some of those things we've talked about over this past hour into account? You use the wrong oil because it's convenient, or maybe you just didn't know. What could happen? What are some things you've seen?
Well, I'll go back to one that's happened not too long ago. I wasn't involved in it, but I did hear about it. There was in this case, it was a small diesel engine and a forklift. And the OEM was very, very adamant about a 5W30 engine oil being used in that application. Well, the customer was using a 1540 in their entire fleet, so they put a 1540 in it. Well, it was a brand new piece of equipment. So, from me being a mechanic from years back and this and that, if things start to wear, clearance will start to open up. Maybe you can get by with a little heavier viscosity. You can look at things like oil pressures. You can see things like that and see if you can get by with it. This is a brand new piece of equipment, so everything was tight. Everything is the way it's supposed to be. The OEM recommended a certain drain interval and recommended a lighter viscosity oil. The customer didn't do it and basically seized the engine. I wasn't involved. I don't know who did the investigation or the teardown on that, but it was determined that it was under warranty. The wrong engine oil was used under warranty, and they condemned the oil for not necessarily the quality of the oil, but the oil viscosity as being the
Right.
wrong viscosity and led to the failure of that engine.
Right. Well, and I mean, it's a good example too of like, look, I know fleets, you're running trucks. Let's say you got 50 trucks, you got the bulk oil tank, you got some oil there, and hey, oh, my pickup truck needs some oil, my car needs some oil, my you're running forklifts need some oil. Like, yeah, no, it's not one size fits all anymore. You really oil isn't just oil. You got to be specific.
God, I've heard that so many times. Oil's oil. Just depends on just put it in there. It's all lube. Anything will work once. That's kind of a joke around here. So can I put that in there? Sure, you can. It'll work once. So
Maybe, yeah, maybe at this point.
maybe.
One going back to oil tests as well. We had a follow-up question on that. I know you mentioned the sending in and the lab testing for oil. Are there any quick oil test analysis that can be done on site instead of sending to a lab? Any basic test kits you'd recommend, or do you really need that lab analysis?
So I'm going to say there isn't. They have field analyzers that you can use. That I don't have a lot of experience with those, but I think they will give you some ideas what's going on. But here you're taking a really quality piece of equipment and into an uncontrolled environment and running tests that you're looking for parts per million of dirt and wear metals. So I mean, as soon as you take it out of the truck and set it on the bench, you risk an inadequate reading. So from my perspective, being in this business for a little while, I would say don't compromise. The sample's anywhere between $13 and $20 a sample, depending on the lab you use. You can do that at every oil change. We have some customers that sample every week, depending on what applications that they're using. They realize the benefits far outweigh the cost of that oil analysis. And a good lab, if you get it to them, they can have the results in 24, 48 hours at the max, unless there's a problem. And it's a controlled environment. The stuff's calibrated on a regular basis. You're going to get consistent readings if you send it to the same place, the same time. So stay away from the field stuff. That's just my opinion. Somebody who owns field equipment is going to call and yell at me. That's fine. I'm not saying they don't work. They will work. They can work. But from my opinion, again, I'm an oil geek. I look at parts per million. I look at things like that. I want to know. I want to see consistency, because that's really the whole key to it. It's consistent.
Right. Well, one of the things that you mentioned earlier really caught on, because we got a number of questions about it that I want to touch on, is the TBN.
Okay.
We had the question of the TBN number is what I used to go by, but some labs don't think the TBN number is relative to oil analysis. Some oil manufacturers use higher TBN numbers to start with. Why is this? Well, what's the story with the TBN?
Okay. And they're not wrong at saying that some labs don't emphasize TBN as much. A lot of them will do TAN, which is your total acid number, and look at how fast your acid is building up in that oil. The TBN is basically, I always joke to it, say it's the Rolaids or the Tums in your oil. It helps to neutralize the acid that's being produced. Typically, you have a couple different types of acids. You have your sulfuric acid, which is the sulfur from the fuel. When it goes in the combustion chamber, mixes with moisture and air, then it produces sulfuric acid, and that gets into the oil, and the acid is corrosive. Another one is nitric acid. There's nitrogen in the air we breathe. You can't get away from it. The engines breathe in air and oxygen and nitrogen. Again, you set it on fire in the combustion process with moisture involved, and then you get nitric acid, again, a corrosive substance. The base number, or your total base number, your TBN, is your alkalinity. It's the oil's ability to neutralize that acid. Well, if a little bit of acid neutralizing ability is good, then we got to have a really high number one to combat it. Not necessarily. There's 15 ppm of sulfur in your diesel fuel these days. We don't need as much TBN to combat that sulfur. But again, there's nitric acid as well. So, and depending if the engine's running poorly, you could have an injector leaking, getting more fuel into the oil than a typical one that's tuned correctly or running correctly. So a higher number of TBN may not be necessary, but what is necessary is TBN retention. You can put TBN or 8 TBN or whatever on your data sheet, and a lot of companies will use an inferior, I won't say a lot, some companies use an inferior additive package, whereas that TBN, when you start it up, it may be at 10, but after the first couple hundred hours, it may be down to a 5. So it's how fast it depletes is the measure of the quality of that TBN. So DA tries to use the best TBN product they can out there. So we look at our additive providers and we make sure we purchase an additive package that will support longevity in the TBN, or acid neutralizing ability. So if you look at somebody that's at 5 when it was at 10, that's at half life. There are some OEMs out there, I won't mention any names, Caterpillar, that says when it's a half TBN life, it's time to change your oil. Well, if I look at this and, I started off, I'm at 5 TBN. There are other oils out there that start at 5, start at 8. There's still maybe a lot of life left in that TBN, or that acid neutralizing ability. Look at your wear metal, look at your oxidation rates, look at all of that, and come to and come to a decision on whether or not that TBN is still holding up as well. I mean, it started off at 10, went to 8, went to 5. Yeah, it doesn't last forever. As your TBN goes up, your acid goes up. So as long as our acid is not high and not having a problem or deteriorating those softer or those metals in your engine, you may still have some leg left on that oil. Why drain it out if it's still working? So again, analysis is the only way to see how fast that's depleting, whether it's holding up. And again, don't blame the additive or the oil, and as long as until you're sure that there's not a problem with the piece of equipment. It's running poorly, injectors leaking, something like that. If and there should be signs of that, fuel dilution, things like that will tell you whether or not the oil is being contaminated. But if the oil is not being contaminated by external contaminants, then the TBN might be still doing its job and may be able to go a little bit longer. The old adage in there that people come up with is when the TBN and TAN cross, in other words, when acid numbers up to 3 and TBN's down to 3, that's when it's time, or it drops to 2.8, that's when it's time to change your oil. And that's a good, safe way to do it. It really is. But out of warranty, good comprehensive oil analysis program, maybe we can squeeze a little bit more life and cost savings to that customer that
Right. I do want to mention we're coming up at the top of the hour. I do want to try to get another question, maybe another one. And we have a lot of them, though. So just to let everybody know, all the questions that get sent over here, we're sending them over to Jim and his team. So he'll be able to follow up with you. So just because we don't get it live here, sorry, there were a lot of great questions. I'm sure Jim and his team will be able to follow up with you and get you the answer you need. I did want to touch on shift gears here a little bit on PC12, because this is even new to me. I'm not super well versed in the new product category. What do you see that meaning to fleets? What is PC12 going to bring to the market, and will it mean all new engine oils like we saw the last go around?
Well, I think we're all hoping that it holds off as long as it possibly can, because we're still adjusting to CJ4 back from 2007. And then with the FA4 category coming out and not going anywhere, I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I haven't read too much about that category. I'm not sure what they're going to be able to address other than high temperature, high shear, things like that. Fuel economy. That's really the only thing I can see that's going to be adjusted. I'm sure the EPA will be in there somewhat. The OEMs obviously have some input in that, a lot of input in that, because they're going to be setting the standards as to viscosity and the need for that category. So I have to kind of play dumb on this category, to be honest with you, because we haven't really researched it that much. Like I said, we've still got a 530 FA4 sitting there in the wings, ready to go whenever people can start accepting it. So I don't want to address PC12 yet. I'm not ready.
Yeah. Fair enough. And to be honest, it's a question that we're starting to ask too at Fleet Equipment, because honestly, we don't know either. Still a lot of questions as that product category is getting developed, and maybe something to talk about in the future. One last one for you here then to wrap us up, because we've talked about it a couple times, but to address it directly, benefits between synthetic, fully synthetic in heavy duty engine oils. What does that mean? What does it bring to the category, and how is it differing from some of the mineral oils, the tried and true mineral oil stuff that we've been using in older engine oils for forever?
Okay. Well, again, it goes back to, and I know I sound like a broken record, but what does the OEM recommend for that application? They've done a lot of testing, a lot of studying, and decided what works best, what holds up the longest, what they can stand behind when it comes to synthetic versus mineral versus synthetic blend for those applications. And a lot of them will allow the use of a couple different options depending on the application. Me personally, what I like to see is I like synthetic blends. Maybe it's because I'm old and I'm old school or whatever, but I tend to lean towards heavier viscosities when applicable, especially in older equipment. But synthetics bring two things to the table. They bring better oxidation stability at higher temperatures. In other words, the oil is going to last a little bit longer with the higher running temperatures that we're seeing today on engine oils and other applications, not just engines, but we're seeing some higher operating temperatures. So you can sleep better knowing that you've got a really good product in there that's going to resist that heat and not oxidize the oil as quickly. Other thing they bring to the table is since the molecules are 99 to 100% the same, it's going to flow a lot better. It's going to get through those tighter clearances, those tighter tolerances that you see. So better flow and better oxidation stability. That's really the two advantages to a synthetic oil. One of the biggest disadvantages is price. I mean, when you've got a PAO or a polyalpha olefin, which is a man-made synthetic, the prices go up. But one of the reasons the prices go up on that is because when you refine an oil to the point to where the molecules are identical, you've cooked some of the good stuff out of it. If I heard layman terms for you, you've distilled it for your old whiskey distillers. You've cooked some of the good stuff out of it, like your natural soyability. In other words, the oil's ability to suspend and keep suspended the additive package that's stirred in there. So it's blended in there or homogenized into the mixture. So in order to, when you lose some of that natural solubility, you have to do things to combat that. And that's adding things like esters. Esters are very stable. They're very, they'll hold and keep suspended those additives into the package. But that also drives the cost up when you do that. So a mineral base will also give you natural lubricating properties that you cook out of it or you distill or refine out of it when you're doing that. So when you use a synthetic blend, you've got the oxidation stability, you've got better flow, but you also have natural lubricating abilities and natural soyability from the unhighly refined, if you will, mineral base or conventional type products. So they all have their place depending on the application. Very high temperatures may need a full synthetic. Some may require a synthetic blend. And if you've got an older piece of equipment or something that's running without a heavy load on it, shorter drain interval, things like that, you might be able to get by with just a straight conventional product. And we offer both. All three. We offer all three at DA. Again, that's where you want to consult your OEM and see what they offer or what they recommend, and then talk to your lubricant provider to see what they recommend to meet those OEM requirements.
Right. Well, and I'm going to echo that because, yeah, the OEM is definitely a go-to source, but I recommend that you talk to Jim and his team at TA Lubricants because I learn a ton every time that we talk. It's always great. There's a wealth of information. I really appreciate you taking the time. For anyone's question we didn't get to, we'll send that over to Jim and his team. He'll be able to follow up with you. As a reminder, this was all recorded. We talked about a lot here. So come back, review it, take some notes. You can come back. You'll get a link in your email here in a couple days when it's up and ready to view. And outside of that, we appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today. Big thanks to Jim. Great insight there. Great conversation. I appreciated it.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it. Enjoy being on the show with you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.